Hi, Nitesh. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Deepak. Thank you so much for having me.
It's really good to have here. And a quick remark: even your face is showing a lot of compassion, and I can see it emanating from you. So I'm quite interested about this journey, about this conversation. But Nitesh, as we start, could you just put some light on your background, your journey, and what has been your progression till this point?
So, thank you for that question. And again, it's a privilege to be here. Um, in terms of my journey, I grew up in Delhi. That's where I was till my early years. And then I moved to Baroda for a few years. And then for many years, I studied in the US when my parents moved there. Um, and I worked in the corporate world after graduating from college, uh, which was a interesting experience that what a lot of people from, I guess, middle class do, or I think in generally people do, I guess. Um, and while I started to work, uh, yoga became part of my life. I was very fortunate that yoga became part of my life, and it sort of became a guiding force in my life. As yoga became more and more, or I got more immersed in the practice, uh, there are many other things that started to happen physically, mentally, outside and inside. Um, and as I was reflecting on things in my life, I always say that, guiding angels kept appearing and saying that, you can't do this or that, you just have to do yoga. So I continued on my journey, and I was very fortunate to study with my teacher in Mysore uh, uh, for many years. And I'm trained under the Ashtanga lineage, which is from the Krishnamacharya and Patavi Jois lineage, and my teacher is Sri Shara Jois. So I studied in Mysore uh, for a few years, and in 2016, my teacher gave me his blessings that I am ready to teach. That's when I started formally teaching the practice of Ashtanga Yoga, and I teach yoga in Bangalore. Uh, and along with that, after yoga became part of my life, uh, again I was extremely fortunate to study uh, uh, Compassion Cultivation Training, which is under the Mahayana tradition, but it was at the Compassion Institute. At that point of time, it was at Stanford University, where I studied with the translator of Dalai Lama, Thupten Jinpala. With him, I studied compassion cultivation, and that has helped me go deeper in my journey of meditation. Uh, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So I teach yoga here, meditation here, and that's what I do now.
And when you talk about the Mahayana tradition, is it that Karuna, Mudita, Metta, Upekha, those segments, or is this something different when it comes to Karuna and compassion?
So Mahayana tradition is there are two main branches of Buddhism. There are many branches. One is when Buddha taught in India, it started to flow outwards in different parts of the world, especially in Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, it is now prevalent as what we call as Theravada Buddhism. And the Mahayana form started to flow initially from India to China and then Japan. But in the middle, Tibet also became one of the places where it got really indoctrinated from the 8th century. So, what you were suggesting are the four immeasurables of Buddhism. But in terms of the Mahayana Buddhism, which I study, and I specifically study the Gelug form, which is the form from His Holiness Dalai Lama's tradition. So that's the one that I studied, and Thupten Jinpala was a translator, or is a translator of His Holiness Dalai Lama. So he took the mind training. So there is something called Lojong, slogans, which are 59 slogans divided into 7 points. And he worked at the Center of Compassion Altruistic Research and Education, which is the CCARE department at Stanford, uh, where he came up with a 8-week course of teaching compassion cultivation in a secular form. So there is nothing religious or spiritual about it, but it's a way of teaching, bringing compassion into your life, bringing compassion in a way that you're able to inculcate not just meditation part of it, but just go deeper into the mind.
Hmm. Uh, so before we move on to compassion, Nitesh, which will remain the main focus, a quick question. You mentioned Ashtanga here and compassion there. So you did say it's a more secular form of teaching, but still they both come from vastly different traditional aspects. So
Yeah.
how has been the balance in your mind while learning as well as now while you're living these two traditions?
See, to remove any sort of spiritual or religious element is always difficult, because the origin of yoga within India, it came from Samkhya, and then the Yoga Sutras from Patanjali. So there is definitely an element of something that's beyond us. You can call it anything that you want. In the Yoga Sutras, we call it the Ishvara. In some other traditions, we call it God, Bhagwan, whatever name you want to give it to. In the Buddhist tradition, of course, Buddha didn't want any of his idols. That was his one of the biggest things. He's like, pray, but I don't want any of my idols or pictures to be anywhere. But things evolved, and people really wanted some form in front of them, and that's why you see those aspects of Buddha idols everywhere, wherever you go. There are still sects of Buddha that, especially in Southeast Asia, where the as Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, similar to his teachings, they are still taught exactly the same way. And even if you look at the Vipassana tradition, it's taught, Goenkaji went to Burma, learned it, and brought it back. So irrespective, removing the spiritual element is something that, for the masses, for people who don't believe in God. But if you think that there is someone who's beyond, who's helping you manage and control, I think that's where the idea of religion and spirituality comes in. But in from a yoga standpoint or a Buddhist standpoint, I don't see any differentiation. They're all very complementary, and one builds over the other. It doesn't matter what's the end point for you.
Perfect. So let's move a little bit deeper into to compassion, Nitesh.
Yeah.
What are the core tenets of compassion teaching or just practicing compassion?
So to talk about compassion a little bit, I think important to understand what compassion is. Uh, so the word compassion is, of course, an English word, but it comes from the Yoga Sutras. The word karuna. That's the first instance that I have seen where the word compassion was mentioned, and in fact, that's where the four immeasurables that you talked about come in as well. Whether it's karuna or maitri or mudita or upekshanam or upekanam, as they say in the Pali language. So wherever it comes from, the word that originates from there. And the idea of compassion is very simple. It's not something which is difficult to understand. It's an inborn natural ability that all of us have. When a child grows up, you might have seen if someone is hurt, a child without thinking, wants to go and help, whether he knows that person or doesn't know that person. But over the years, we get conditioned in different ways, because of our experiences, because of our friends, family, because of our surroundings, and because of whatever reason that might be. Uh, so to define compassion is more that it's something from within which says that I want to go remove someone else's suffering. And when we say remove someone else's suffering, And that doesn't mean physically. We just wish from within. There is an action that is not necessarily required. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that people face, that when I have to be compassionate, does that mean that I have to go physically help? No, it's just a mere wish through which I want to go and help someone else. Uh, uh, so one of the tenets that, as you asked, is that you have to have uh, some sort of a feeling for the other person, that you're able to understand the emotions of the other person. And when you're able to understand the emotions, what we call as empathy, that you're able to understand what the other person is going through, uh, and not necessarily that you have to feel the same way, but understand that that person is going through some challenges. And when that person is going through challenges, you just have a wish for them that may you be free of suffering. That's one way of doing that. But whatever wish comes from your mind, but you can do it physically as well. There's nothing, because that's of course, the logical next step. Because if someone's suffering, you want to go physically help them as well. So that's the next step forward.
Nitish, you mentioned, and that's an interesting point. You mentioned empathy, because usually empathy, compassion, kindness, how close together are these? Or even when you go deeper into your teaching, how distinct are these in terms of feeling and also in terms of manifesting in action?
So let's start with kindness. I think kindness is that when you are doing anything in your life, you do it with all your power from within. That I want to make sure that whatever emotion is coming out, whatever way of communication that's happening from my side towards yours, is with a lot of love. So that's something we can talk about from a kindness perspective. But when we talk about empathy, as I was mentioning, empathy is a way that you feel something for the other person. You feel an emotion what the other person is going through, and when you have that feeling of that someone's going through a challenging time, you just being there, like Deepak, if you are going through a difficult time and your friend or a family member just calls, Deepak, how you're doing, right? It necessarily does not mean that I have to really feel that emotion, or I can uh, uh, not just feel it, but that I can do anything about that. But you're just there, that I'm there for you, irrespective. I'm there to listen to you in any way that I can reduce that uh, challenge that you're going through. So empathy can be positive and negative. So when let's say your sports team is winning, or it doesn't have to be sports team, it's your family member is celebrating something, or friend is celebrating something, and you are there in that celebration with them, right? So that's a positive form of empathy. Emulating emotions in any form or fashion is what empathy really is. And compassion is the next step forward. Compassion is the ability, when you're feeling when you're feeling that someone's going through negative emotions, you bring a wish from within, that may this person be happy, may this person be free of suffering. And also, compassion gives you this ability to be grounded. It helps you to reset very quickly, rather than just stay in one place and continue over the challenging emotions that you're going through. So that's one of the greatest differences between empathy and compassion. That with compassion, you're able to live your life, and live your life in a very uh, grounded, and also in a way that you're able to enjoy whatever you're feeling.
While we are on this topic of definitions or cousins of compassion, uh, are there also any harmful translations of compassion, as in where people misunderstand what compassion is? So, something which is often remarked is that even if you are in a bad state, or even while recognizing your misery, I don't have to be miserable myself. That is not compassion. Right? In this domain, are there any harmful translations or misunderstood aspects of defining compassion?
Uh, so I'll take that question in two forms, and I'll talk about empathy as well, because empathy is one of the tenets of compassion. So when we talk about negative aspects of compassion, so I'll address that first. People feel that we all are compassionate. I haven't met a person who says that they're not compassionate. And when you tell a person that you can be more compassionate, like, what else can I do? I do so much. I'm so nice. I'm this. I'm that. Right. So do I need more compassion? No. It's the other person who needs to change. Right. So that's what always happens. So I think people have this misunderstanding of compassion that it's just one thing that I have. Uh, but it's compassion is like a gift that keeps giving. The more you cultivate it, uh, the more you're able to really cherish your life. uh, in one of the interviews, the Dalai Lama, he starts his meditation around 3 in the morning and he meditates till 7 or 8. And one of the things that he meditates on is compassion for all beings. Compassion for all beings. And because he's listening to stories day in and day out of people going through challenges, he needs to make sure that he feels okay. He's able to absorb everything, and people at that level are able to do that, right? So one of the uh, misguided notions about compassion is that I'll be overwhelmed by it. Like, because if I am compassionate, how will I be able to enjoy my life? Right. And this term sometimes in the technical domain we call as that compassion fatigue. So that I'm fatigued by it all being nice. And if you go to war-torn areas, or if you go to a place where there are a lot of challenges, like, you'll not be able to really uh, go through those things because you would feel fatigued. However, it's a little bit different in terms of people understanding it. What you're really feeling is what is called as emotional distress rather than a compassion fatigue. What is or empathic distress would be the right terminology for it. So when someone is trying to understand the emotions and they're feeling someone else's emotions, they're unable to cope up with the challenges that they are facing. Someone's gone through difficult situations, and especially in the past 2 years, when people have
Hmm.
gone through COVID and such difficult times in our lives, uh, we had many emotions that we had to deal with. I still cannot forget the image of this little child at the railway station sitting next to the mother of his body. And I don't know if you remember that, but this happened a couple of years ago. Or the migrants walking from Delhi to different parts of India. That walk, it just doesn't go right. And you were feeling the emotions that they were going through, right? Uh, and sometimes you got really overwhelmed with those emotions because we didn't know what to do with those emotions. And that's a state of emotional distress, right? So you were empathic distress. We're feeling that at that point of time. However, if compassion is part of your life, you just sit, and from within, if you feel like you want to take action, which a lot of people did at that point of time, whether they wanted to call other people, speak to them, or donate, or in any way that they could help. We had so much help during the time of corona when people were going through difficult time. We had so many heroes who just stood up. So that's compassion in action, that you're taking action. But not everyone has the opportunity or the ability to do that. So at that time, at that point in your mind, if you have developed the ability to be compassionate, if you have an ability to practice compassion meditation or some sort of a meditation that helps you, uh, just make sure that the other person feels okay, and you keep repeating in the mind. And there is enough research to say that if you practice compassion meditation, you are feeling calmer at that point of time, and you're able to overcome the challenge, the emotions, or the that you are going through. The emotions really really boil down, and you're able to reset quickly and move on to the next thing in life. And that's the most important thing, because if it doesn't matter whether you're a leader or not, but if you have to overcome your emotions, right, you have to take the next action rather than taking an action in an emotional way. You're able to take it in a very balanced form or fashion. So that's the difference between both.
Uh, a question which came just from what you were mentioning, Nitesh, is that once you start feeling compassion, and you mentioned the migrant crisis, or even in COVID, there was so much stuff happening around us. And if you are feeling compassion for somebody, you mentioned compassion can be in thought, it can also be in action. But within that comes a point where you might also start feeling helpless. You mentioned that not everybody has the resources to really make meaningful
Hmm.
contribution. So you are
Correct.
empathetic, you are feeling compassion, but there comes a point where you're also feeling helpless, that you can't do anything. So how does
Correct.
one get to the balance in between all of that?
Uh, so there are many days when you will feel helpless, and many of us do. Many of us do. Migrant crisis was one of the things, and in COVID. But if you look at even the healthcare industry, for example, within the healthcare industry, the doctors, the nurses, and the healthcare staff, they're overwhelmed by the challenges and the sufferings that people are facing. Even if you look at the police force, these traffic policemen who are outside, they are overworked. And forget about them. People in the corporate world, they are overwhelmed, right? They feel helpless sometimes when they forget about outside. They themselves feel helpless in the situation that they are in, right? And at that point of time, when we're talking about uh, cultivating compassion, what my suggestion always is, start small, start in a way that you feel comfortable, slowly make things part of your life. Uh, Find a teacher or a place, or, in a way that you can start meditating. It's something that you can inculcate within. And once you start noticing the benefits that meditation gives you, that how different you feel in challenging situations, at that point of time, uh, uh, you will realize the strength. So unless and until you experience it, because masters before us who have come for thousands of years, it doesn't matter what tradition, they have shown us the benefits of each practice. And we're living in a place where there are so many options available. I remember when I started practicing, uh, they weren't, people, things weren't as popular as they are now. But now, every nook and corner you find some way or the other. And I hope, when people get into it, they find a genuine teacher, and they start cultivating or practicing meditation in their life. And once you do, like, the idea of helplessness will move
Mm,
away. uh, Within the because we're talking about compassion, I'll try and bring about both the Buddhist side and also a little bit of the Vedantic side of things. So from Buddha side, it says Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So the whole idea of Buddha is that, you have the Buddha within, that everything that you desire is from within. And from the Vedantic tradition, it's the exact same thing, Aham Brahmasmi. So I am the one who has the Brahman within. So I don't need anything outside support. So the helplessness will go away when you start relying on yourself rather than someone outside. Uh, the second aspect of this is dharma, which is in both traditions talked about beautifully. Whether we talk about Bhagavad Gita, or whether we talk about from a Buddhist standpoint, that you find out, what is it that you're working towards. You will face challenges no matter what. Like, for example, Mahatma Gandhi, when he was going through challenges, he in all his books, he says he always relied on Bhagavad Gita, a text that was near and dear to him. And when he was facing challenges, right, when he faced the difficulties that he did, he said that I am the person who's in search of God, the search of truth. I'm a simple man. I'm not a politician. I'm not a freedom fighter. I'm a simple man in search of truth. So if that's your dharma, you find out what your dharma is, then you can go deeper into whatever you're trying to do. And it'll move you away from the helplessness situations. And the beauty of believing that is that that universe conspires for you to help you in a way that you won't even know. Like, it'll just hold you and move you forward, whatever that, right? And third is the idea of community, the sangha, the satsang, right? This, if you want to believe the entire world is a community for you, right? It doesn't have to be a human. But because communication is extremely important to us, you will find a like-minded community. Some people do that, within the places that they live. Now, because of the internet and the virtual things, we have opportunities to have sangha around the world. So find like-minded people, and when you are in that helpless situation, find a friend, phone a friend. Like, what is
Mm.
kaun banega crorepati, right? Phone a friend. So they're there always for us. Uh, but you can always, one of the things that I like to do is just read a book. Like, before the session, I was trying to just go through, like, this is one of my books that I read from Ramakrishna. And, have your favorite text, just read through it, whatever that book might be for you. Many ways for you to
Mm.
overcome, but you really need to work on it. That's the only thing. Without that hard work, without tapas, it won't.
Could you also speak a little bit about self-compassion?
So self-compassion, the word has recently come by, where Kristen Neff and Chris Kermer have come up with mindful self-compassion, which is a beautiful training. If you've never experienced that, you should. I highly recommend you to at least listen to Kristen's story or Chris' story. Both of them have incredible stories, and there are people all over the world talking about self-compassion. But the idea of self-compassion really comes from that. In our tradition, we've always been taught Atati Devo Bhav, right? So it's the other who we need to respect. And even from the early childhood days, we give importance to others rather than ourselves. And when we're trying to give importance to others, somewhere along the lines, we forget about ourselves. Uh, an example in the corporate world would be that, or in the outside world would be, if someone's given you a task, you'll be just working on finishing up that task no matter what, without thinking of your own health, whether this is something that you're capable of doing or not. And self-compassion is a simple idea. Put yourself first. You are the most important person to do that, and no one else can do that for you. And Kristen and Chris define it beautifully, that it has three components: mindfulness, compassion, and common humanity. Those are the elements that they bring in. And by doing that, being mindful, that you're aware of things, you do things, by being kind, you're truly being honest, you're showing that love that I mentioned in the beginning, than to others. You do it to yourself. And Chris does it beautifully. When he talks about common humanity, he brings the world together as if you're hugging the globe. So when you hug the globe, you have the entire world with you. So that's the idea of self compassion, as or mindful self compassion. But the eventual thing is, you take out time for yourself, uh, and and you do things based on how you can feel calm. It's not the idea that you are narcissistic. Narcissistic is a strong word, but you are egoist in certain ways, that you're taking care of yourself. You're just listening to your own needs, and you're just responding to. That's all there is.
Right. And then allied theme there is that when you teach traditional compassion or compassion practices, you mentioned corporate atmosphere where most of us are so overburdened that there is an anxiety ridden lifestyle which we are exhibiting. And in that arena, compassion practice, when it is for somebody else, it almost seems counterintuitive, right? You mentioned somewhere that I already do so much. Should I be more compassionate
Mm-hmm.
now? The other person should be more compassionate. So there is almost a counterintuitive ring to it, that I'm already so overburdened. I'll do more for others. Who will do for me? Has that been a theme which has been occurring in your teaching, or how do you counter that point?
I think that's a common problem a lot of us face. That I've done so much for the others. Why don't they do? They should do this. They should do that. Like Deepak should do this for me. He should so and so. That's the common theme that all of us go through, right? And there are many reasons for that, but one of the major ones is that you know our mind is so beautiful, it can make movies out of movies, like in movie after movie, and you can build your own stories before you do anything else, right? So we have already made a decision for the other person, and if you look at the past 20, at least when I was growing up, like a lot of decisions were made for us, that we were supposed to go to school, and then you were supposed to be at least an engineer or a doctor. If you're not qualified enough, then you go into commerce. If you are really a student who doesn't get good grades, you go into
Mm.
humanities, right? And then the next thing is that you need to get married or get a job first, get married, and so on and so forth, right? Like things were already pre-decided for us, and because they have been pre decided, our expectations have already been set. And that's what we do in relationships as well. So essentially, what we are trying to do here is, how do you act in a relationship? How do you communicate? That's the essential idea. What is the best way to communicate, right? So when I communicate, you've already expecting an answer. And if it doesn't fall in that domain, you're not like the way that I want it to be, right? That's where the challenge comes in. And I think that's where the idea of acceptance comes in, right? You accept the way the other person is. Like on the forefront, Deepak, you may, and Yash, for example, who was there before, we may all seem different, right? But deep within, like as we were talking about in mindful compassion, that deep below the layers that have conditioned us, there is a human within. And that human within desires happiness. The idea of your happiness might be different than mine, but the idea is that we all desire to be happy in life. We are trying to find that in a way that makes it natural for us. So when you're facing challenges, when you're doing something, can you just think in your mind, just like me, this person is loved by many others for the way that this person is, right? And when we are able to dissolve those boundaries between you and me, and I really look at that human who was 2 years old or a 3 year old, the idea of any animosity or any worry would really go away. And I think that's the essence of compassion teachings, that it helps dissolve any artificial boundaries that we have created because we have expectations or we have been conditioned or normalized. And that's the way that you don't feel anxious or help.
Perfect, Nitesh. So, moving into the practices side of compassion, and again, I'm assuming this is a huge subject, but if somebody had to take the first few steps into
Mhm.
cultivating compassion, what would those be?
So, in terms of cultivating compassion, like I said, it's an inborn ability that we have. And I have learned so much from innumerable amount of people. When I go out there, they're naturally so compassionate. Uh, and people have, uh, like strangers have invited me to their houses without any reason. And they've done so much, they've helped me, right? So to make sure, I want to be clear that all of us are compassionate. As I mentioned other in the beginning as well, that all of us believe we have compassion, right? But it's also something that gets really below in the priority structure for us, because we want things which are outside rather than inside. And if someone wants to start practicing compassion cultivation, or at least nurturing the idea of compassion in their lives, it doesn't have to be meditation. I teach it using meditation, but it doesn't have to be meditation, right? Just going out there and volunteering itself, what we call as karma yoga, you can start with that ability. It helps you really break down the barriers that are coming within. But from a meditation standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, I think the first step always is having some sort of a meditation practice, finding a meditation teacher for you, and building a meditation practice. Of course, once you start building that meditation practice, for developing the idea of compassion cultivation, the course that I teach, the 8 week course, Compassion Cultivation, is a beautiful way for people to bring compassion into their lives. And there are many ways out there, like I mentioned. The four yogas itself, it's all about finding compassion in our lives. And so, yeah, there are innumerable ways. But I think starting a meditation practice is definitely, I would highly recommend.
Perfect. And Nitish, something you mentioned earlier, or we talked about some common themes emerging. But apart from those that we discussed, when you take this 8 week course, or when beginners, or even those who have experienced, who are experienced in compassion practices, do you see any other common recurring themes which people are facing today, for which there could be, so there is a common set of problems for which there might be an easy fix or a common solution?
So I think one of the common problems that I see, we're talking from uh, a more internal standpoint, but I think the major problem that I see people because I teach yoga, a lot of people come to us because they have physical body issues,
Mm.
and to sit in meditation practice, you need a lot of strength. It's a very active thing. It's not, one of the myths of meditation is, that it might make you feel calm, but it may not necessarily be the case. It might make you feel very different. But to sit in meditation for long periods of time, for long sitting practice, you need a lot of strength. And that's one aspect of it. But to answer your question about the physical, the challenges which I feel that people are facing is that they're not physically active. And food being such an important ingredient for us, that's that becomes primary for us. And the reason why I feel that people aren't physically active is because we have learned the art of distraction so well that we can't commit to
Mm.
something which is long term, right? We want uh, new things again and again. So I think that's one of the challenges that people are facing, that the idea of distraction and not being physically active. There's a lot of work going on, and there are a lot of people who are working on these things, making people physically active, or working on removing distraction. But there is a lot more that can be done. We are a country of 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion people right now, so there is a lot of scope for people to move away from their mobile phones, and just work on the idea of concentration, right? And that's the greatest antidote to distraction. So yeah, if those are the two major things that came to my mind.
Right. And in fact, at least in this genre, or in this domain in which we usually hold conversations of meditation, mindfulness, spirituality, we are often completely focused on the mental aspect. But the physical
Mm.
aspect is equally, if not more important, because unless you can hold to any practice, tapas, which you mentioned, there has to be a sustained way of doing it. And that is usually only possible when you are at least some level of physically fit to move forward in that direction.
Right, I completely agree with you. Yeah, it's something that people can see rather than experience, because meditation is all imagination and visualization. Uh, However, physical is something that we can all experience. Uh, and if you're physically healthy, then meditation becomes a lot easier. If you are physically challenged, then meditation is very challenging. So I would always suggest to start on a physical standpoint and have some sort of physical routine, whether it's an asana practice or walking or any sport or an activity that you do. And having that physical activity will keep you healthier. It'll keep you in a place where you feel that some energy has burnt out, and you'll feel a lot good as well. And then when you sit in for actual meditation practice, you will really cherish that a lot more compared to if you don't have. I mean, I wouldn't know the other side because I have a physical practice. But this is what I've heard from other people, that if they directly come in and sit for a meditation practice, they feel really good from within. But the longer practices become a little bit more.
Perfect, Tish. And before we end, would you like to share any of your favorite story, analogy, shloka, quotation, anything which resonates with you in your practice and in your teaching?
I think a story. I think a story would be nice. This I teach at a Montessori. I teach 6 to 10-year-old kids, and I love working with children because they have so much energy and they're a clean slate, but it brings its own challenges. And one of the idea that I worked with the kids was to bring satya, or truth. I was working on the yamas and niyamas with the children, and I picked satya with them, and I asked uh, them that do they lie. And I remember these are 6 to 10 year olds. So I didn't ask whether they lie. So I asked whether they don't say the truth. And majority of them said they don't say the truth. And when they don't say the truth, I was very curious. Why would a 6 year old or a 7 year old need to lie? How does it become part of our lives? And majority of them, there were two themes that really came out of it. One was that they were really afraid of their parents getting angry. So that's where the idea of communication really comes in. They want to please their parents, so that's why they lie. And the other theme was very beautiful because they didn't want their friends to get upset if they are going with another friend. So that was very cute. And I did a thought experiment with them, and I said, for the next week, until I see you next week, I want you to just say the truth. And kids are so beautiful; they'll just follow you by the word. They don't think twice. They're like, whatever you say, they'll just follow it to the brim. The 10-year-olds were a little different because they were conditioned, but the 6, 7, 8, and most of the 9-year-olds were in a beautiful boat. And when majority of them came back and they followed the idea of truth, the common thing that came out, that said, we were so happy during the week. Our parents were so happy, and we could do whatever we wanted to because we didn't have to hide. So the idea I mentioned Mahatma Gandhi before as well, and here also it's the same. Like, if you're true from within and outside, if you're the same person from within and outside, you will be much more happier in life. You will be able to experience the true happiness which this life has to give while we are on this planet Earth.
Wonderful story, Nitesh. Thanks for sharing that, and also thanks for coming on this podcast. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I'm sure we have all learned a lot from this one. So thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a privilege and honor to be here. Much appreciated. Thank you, Deepak.